He just wanted to surprise his fiancée. What he heard inside that car destroyed everything, but he didn't know that yet. On that cold Chicago night, sitting behind the wheel of an old Toyota that smelled of cheap pine, he was just Mike, an anonymous driver. A disguise that separated him from his luxury penthouses and imported cars by a chasm of intentions. In the pocket of his simple jacket, the velvet box with the $50,000 engagement ring seemed to burn, a secret about to be revealed, the final proof of his love. He leaned over, adjusting a small bouquet of flowers on the dashboard, a final touch of romanticism that would soon be crushed. That's when he saw her, coming out of the building's revolving door, her silhouette framed against the city lights. She was walking toward the car, toward him. Luke smiled, one last naive smile. The trap, or the surprise, was set. The test was about to begin. Before we discover the price of truth on that Chicago night, I want to know, where in the world are you watching this story about what money can't buy? Leave your country in the comments. And if you believe that true character is revealed in the hardest moments, subscribe now and hit the bell, because Luke's journey is just beginning. Done? Great. Now, let's go back to the beginning of it all. To the man who was about to lose an empire to find himself. The door of the old Camry opened and Madison stepped in, bringing with her the glow of a world to which that car did not belong. Her designer coat brushed against the worn plastic dashboard, and a cloud of her expensive perfume, a fragrance that once promised nights of luxury, now filled the confined space with a suffocating presence. Luke Henderson, disguised as Mike under a baseball cap, kept his eyes fixed ahead, his hands firm on the wheel. He felt the rough fabric of the seat, a stark contrast to the soft leather of his Mercedes, and braced himself. The test had begun. "Ugh, what is that smell?" she said, her first sentence not a hello but a complaint. "I hate these cheap cars." Without waiting for an answer, she took out her phone, the screen's glow illuminating her impatient face as she dialed a number, and put it on speakerphone with an indifference that said everything. Her friend Jessica's voice sounded conspiratorial and cheerful. "Hey, girl, ready for dinner?" The conversation drifted through trivial matters for a moment, until Jessica hit a nerve. "Oh, honey, just hang in there," she said, with a laugh that made a muscle in Luke's jaw twitch. "I know Ryan Davis has a thing for you, but Luke is the vault, right? The guarantee. You can't have it all." In the rearview mirror, Luke's expression changed. One part of him, the CEO used to winning, wanted to laugh at the audacity, but the other part, the man who had allowed himself to love, felt the ground disappear from under the cheap car. Madison sighed, a sound of pure boredom, as if her guaranteed future were a burden. "I know," she replied, dragging out the words. "Just 6 more months. 6 more months and half of all that becomes mine. The countdown has begun." She laughed, a sound that seemed to shatter the silence in the car. "Besides, I've already spent $30,000 on his card this month alone. The idiot doesn't even check the statement." The city outside, with its towering skyscrapers that Luke once called his playground, now seemed like a blur of indifferent lights. Each one of those lights was a silent witness to his humiliation. For a moment his fingers brushed the lid of the glove compartment. Inside, cold and heavy, was the $50,000 engagement ring. The symbol of a promise he now discovered was just a contract. But Madison's cruelty had not yet reached its peak. Her eyes landed on a small bouquet of simple flowers he had left on the dashboard. They were her favorites, or at least the ones she had once said they were. In a moment he now understood was part of a long performance. She picked them up with her fingertips, with a restrained disgust. "Ugh, how tacky." Without a shred of hesitation, she rolled down the window and threw them into the darkness of the avenue. In the rearview mirror, Luke watched the white petals scatter on the wet asphalt, swallowed by the night and crushed one by the tires of the car behind them. They were the wreckage of his love. The rest of the trip was made in absolute silence. When they arrived at the restaurant, he stopped the car. Madison got out without a thank you, already immersed in her world of appearances. Luke didn't watch her go. He waited for the click of the door closing, took the ring out of his pocket, and placed it in the empty glove compartment, closing the lid with a funereal softness. Then he accelerated. He wasn't running away from something, but crossing through the void toward a nothingness that, for the first time, felt more honest than anything he had ever had. Luke drove for hours in the old Camry, aimlessly, a ghost haunting the arteries of a city he no longer recognized. The glass towers of his empire seemed to mock him, monuments to a life that had become foreign. He didn't go home. Instead, he kept driving to the south side of the city, where the lights were dimmer, and stopped in front of a cheap motel. The room smelled of disinfectant and solitude. He sat on the edge of the bed, still in his disguise, and felt, for the first time, truly poor. The mornings were the worst. He would wake up in a panic, his mind searching for emails that would not arrive. To survive in this new world, he needed cash, a way to support himself without accessing the bank accounts that connected him to his old life. Wandering the streets, he saw his reflection in the window of a pawn shop. The image of a rich man pretending to be poor was ridiculous. It was a humbling epiphany. He entered the shop, the bell on the door announcing his surrender. Without a word, he took the Rolex off his wrist, a symbol of his legacy, and placed it on the counter. The money he received wasn't to buy a new life, but to finance the funeral of his old one. With the cash in his pocket, he returned to the Camry, now no longer a disguise, but his only asset, his only refuge. He became Mike full-time. The first ride was a baptism by fire. An executive, a version of himself, yelled from the back seat, "The light's green, pal. My time is money." The passenger gave him 1 star, with the comment, "Weird driver." Later, parked in an empty lot, the humiliation consumed him. Instinct made him grab his smartphone, the last vestige of his power. His thumb trembled as it hovered over his private banker's contact. 1 call, and everything would go back to normal. The comfortable lie. Then, with a sigh that carried the full weight of his old life, he turned off the screen and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. It was a choice. That's when he saw them. At the bus stop, a couple shared a broken umbrella, laughing as if they'd won the lottery. They had nothing, and they had everything. That glimpse of authentic joy was the final blow. It was there, in the silence of his cheap car, that Luke Henderson whispered the most honest confession of his life to the dashboard. "I don't know how to be anyone." He opened the glove compartment, the same one where the diamond ring once sat, and placed a single crumpled ketchup packet inside. The first artifact of a life he had now chosen to build from scratch. For weeks, Luke's nights as Mike were a blur of anonymous faces, a self-imposed penance in a purgatory of asphalt. He was getting used to the emptiness, until, on a rainy Tuesday, the door of his Camry opened and humanity stepped in. Lauren Mitchell was not like the others. There was a genuine exhaustion in her eyes, but no bitterness. "Hi," she said with a faint smile. "Sorry if I smell like medicine. It's been a long day." Her sincerity was the first crack in the cynical armor Luke was building. Her ride had 2 stops, one to pick up a takeout container, another to get medicine for her grandmother. While he waited, Luke's stomach rumbled. When Lauren returned and heard it again, she did something Luke's brain, trained in suspicion, couldn't process. Without hesitation, she split her sandwich in half and held one out to him. "Here," she said. "You look more tired than I do." Luke stared at the food. No one had ever offered him half of anything. That gesture of pure, unconditional generosity was a foreign language he suddenly longed to learn. Impressed by Mike's quiet kindness, and needing a reliable routine for her daily visits to the hospital where her grandmother was staying, Lauren made a proposal at the end of that first week. "Do you do private rides?" she asked, her voice a little hesitant but direct. "I need to go to the hospital every day around this time. I'd pay, of course. We could agree on a flat rate." Luke, whose time was once billed in thousands of dollars, agreed without a shred of hesitation. The payment she offered barely covered gas, but the opportunity to see her every day was a treasure he couldn't measure. That daily trip to the hospital became their sacred ritual. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Luke learned that Lauren considered it a fancy dinner when she could get anything she wanted from the hospital vending machine. She laughed at him, a contagious laugh, when she found out he didn't know the price of a gallon of milk. Stuck in traffic, they began to share more than just the car space. She told him about her grandmother, Rose, the woman who raised her and whom she now cared for with fierce devotion. When she asked about his family, the lie was born, easy and painful. He invented a mechanic father and a seamstress mother. Lauren listened intently, but after a moment, she tilted her head with a curious look. "You know, Mike," she said with a half-smile, "sometimes it feels like you learned how to be a person by reading a manual. Who were you before you drove this car?" Luke's heart went cold. He managed to deflect with a joke, but her question hung in the air, a small ticking time bomb. By the 3rd month, the chemistry between them was an electric current. She introduced him to country music through the car's Bluetooth. One night, she left a cheap scarf on the seat. Luke kept it in the glove compartment, next to the ketchup packet. Her scent, a mix of vanilla and honesty, became his anchor. But the weight of the lie grew with the same intensity. After a night, they laughed until their sides hurt. Luke sat alone in his car and looked at himself in the rearview mirror. The face staring back was Mike's, the man who was winning Lauren's heart. But underneath was Luke, the liar. He picked up his phone, tormented, and started to type, "Lauren, I'm not who you think I am." He couldn't send it. He deleted the message, feeling like a coward. Then, their new world was put to the test. Lauren got in the car one night, her face pale with panic. The hospital had given an ultimatum, $5,000, or her grandmother's treatment would be suspended. The old Luke's instinct screamed, "Write a check, fix it." He felt the ghost of his former self trying to take the wheel, but he resisted. Mike only had his time and his car. "Okay," he said. "On top of our usual ride, we'll do others. All night. Whatever extra I make, I'll split with you." They drove for 16 hours. At the end, they spread the crumpled bills on the dashboard. $247. The sight of the small amount broke Lauren's fortress. The tears of frustration came all at once. "It's not enough," she sobbed. "It's never enough." In that moment, at 4 in the morning, Luke did the only thing he could. He held her. And in that embrace, he felt a warmth and a truth that no fortune could buy. The words almost escaped his lips. "Lauren, I have to tell you." But she silenced him, placing a finger on his mouth. "No, Mike. Don't say anything. You're perfect just the way you are." And in the silence that followed, she kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted of reheated coffee, salty tears, and the desperate hope of two tired souls. For Luke, it was the first moment of genuine happiness in his life, and he knew, with a sharp pain in his chest, that it was all built on the foundation of a lie. It was a Tuesday night at a noisy Denny's downtown. For the first time in months, Luke felt a genuine peace. He and Lauren were sharing a stack of pancakes, and her laugh, sparked by a silly joke he made, was the only sound that mattered in the universe. He watched her, her face illuminated by the restaurant's yellow light, and thought he could live in that moment forever. He was safe. He was home. And it was in that exact moment of peace that Luke's past paid a private investigator to kick down the door of his present. Madison hadn't found him by chance. She had hunted him down. And now, she strode alone to their table, a hurricane of designer clothes and contempt. Everyone in the restaurant stopped to stare. "Well, look what I found," she said, her voice loud. The rat finally came out of the sewer. As Madison's accusations filled the air, Luke's mind disconnected from reality. His gaze wasn't on her, but fixed on a drop of pancake syrup slowly dripping down the side of the plate. The entire world had stopped, reduced to that slow, sticky movement. It was the only thing that made sense amid the sound of his life shattering. He barely registered the iPad being thrown on the table, photos of his old life flashing by. He only snapped back to reality when he heard Madison's venomous voice directed at Lauren. He did the same test on you that he did on me. Congratulations, honey. You passed the poverty test. Lauren's gaze moved from the photos to Luke's face, and the silent, profound pain he saw there finally pulled him out of his paralysis. Come on, Luke, Madison ordered. Stop playing poor. The fun is over. But Luke couldn't move. The silence that followed was absolute, 5 seconds that lasted an eternity. And it was Lauren who broke it. With a calm and a dignity that silenced the restaurant, she stood up. Slowly, she opened her purse and took out a single $20 bill. She placed it gently on the table. This is for my share, she said, her voice firm, nodding at the pancakes. Then she looked directly at Luke, and the pain in her eyes was a sentence. The sandwich on the first day. I thought that was real. Consider us even now. She looked at him one last time. I fell in love with Mike. Luke, I don't know you. And without looking back, she turned and walked out. The bell on the door chimed, announcing her departure. The silence she left behind was quickly filled by a murmur of voices. Gazes that were once curious were now filled with pity and contempt. The waitress shook her head in silent disapproval. In that moment, Luke was neither the millionaire nor the driver. He was just the villain in everyone's story. Madison, seeing her apparent victory, stepped forward, her voice now a possessive whisper. So, Luke, she said, holding out her hand to him, are you coming? Or are you going to stay here and sink with the trash? She turned and walked toward the door without looking back, with the arrogant certainty that he would follow. But the story didn't go with her. The focus stayed there, fixed on Luke. He looked at Madison's silhouette disappearing into the night. Then his gaze returned to the $20 bill Lauren had left on the table, the price of her dignity. The whole world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his choice. Return to the golden cage or embrace the wreckage of a brutal truth. Outside, the door of a black Escalade opened for Madison. She waited, her face illuminated by the headlights, a triumphant smile on her face. But Luke didn't follow her. He remained seated, staring at the $20 bill, until the sound of the luxury car speeding away in anger became just another noise in the night. The choice was made. He no longer wanted the golden cage. He wanted what he had lost in that cheap restaurant, the chance to be real. The next 3 days were a silent hell. 47 calls to Lauren, all went to voicemail. Dozens of text messages were written, rewritten, and deleted. He waited across the street from the CVS, only to see her leaving through the back door to avoid him. Desperation led him to his last resort. That night, he went to her building and sat in the cold hallway outside her door, and he waited for 6 long hours. When Lauren arrived, exhausted, she stopped abruptly when she saw him. A wall of anger and pain rose in her eyes. Please, he begged, standing up. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Reluctantly, she opened the door, and he followed her into the small apartment that was now a courtroom. There, under the dim light of a lamp, Luke fell apart. He told her everything, unfiltered. He spoke of the suffocating loneliness, the cynical test, and then his voice broke. I was so empty, Lauren. So lost that one day a street vendor gave me a bottle of water without asking for anything, and I almost broke down right there, because in 30 years, no one had ever given me anything without a price. No one, until I met you and your sandwich. He explained how, with each day by her side, the lie he created became an unbearable prison. Lauren listened in silence. When he finished, her reaction came in waves. First, anger. You used my life, my struggle, as a laboratory for your existential crisis? Then, the anger broke, revealing the raw pain beneath. I introduced you to my grandmother. I split my last dollar with you, she yelled, the sentence echoing in the small apartment. Finally, she faced him, the pain turning into a sharp clarity. But you know what hurts the most. The arrogance of thinking that my honesty, needed to be tested by you. That was the final blow. Luke broke down, the sobs coming from a deep, broken place. I wasn't testing you, he choked out. It was never about you. I was trying to find out if there was anyone in the world who could love Mike. The nobody. He looked at her, his face streaked with tears. Because if you could love him, maybe one day, I could too. The air grew heavy with his confession. Lauren watched him, her anger dissipated by the sight of his complete destruction. I did love Mike, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But Mike was a lie too. Give me one reason, Luke. One single reason to believe that any part of it was real. Wordlessly, Luke reached into his trembling pocket. He didn't pull out a diamond ring or a check. He took out a small ketchup packet, crumpled and worn, and placed it in the palm of her hand. This was real, he said. Every shared sandwich, every drive until dawn, we were real. And then, silence. A heavy silence, filled only by the sound of their trembling breaths and the distant hum of the city outside. Lauren said nothing. She just stared at the small red and white object in her hand, turning it over, feeling the wrinkled paper. Their future wasn't being decided with shouts, but in that mortal silence, where she weighed the value of a ketchup packet against the weight of a devastating lie. Lauren didn't give him an answer that night. What followed was a period of silence, where Luke's actions would have to speak louder than his words. He didn't reach out to her. Instead, he acted. A week later, he anonymously paid off the hospital debt, down to the last cent. He began the process of donating most of his fortune, an act of detachment no one would see. And every morning, before the sun came up, he left a hot coffee and a donut at Lauren's door, no note, and walked away. The gesture wasn't a request. It was a silent prayer. Lauren saw the coffee the first morning and ignored it. On the third, she took it inside. Days later, the letter from the hospital arrived. Balance due, 0.0. She knew. Her reaction was a storm, relief, anger at how easily his money solved everything, and a reluctant admiration that he hadn't asked for anything in return. For 3 months, she watched from a distance. His actions were consistent, quiet, humble. This wasn't the gesture of a man trying to buy forgiveness, but of someone living out a penance. One afternoon, she found herself in her apartment, holding the small envelope with the $20 bill. The decision weighed on her hands. Part of her wanted to forget everything, to move on, but then her gaze fell on the cheap scarf he had returned with some of her books. She picked it up, and the faint scent of vanilla and honesty was still there. A memory of laughter in traffic, of the man who listened to her like no one else. The memory of Mike. With a new resolve, she put the envelope in her purse and left. She found him at the same Denny's, as if she knew he would return to the scene of the disaster. But as she reached the door, she paused. He was sitting at a corner table, but he wasn't reading just any novel. He was completely focused on a thick, used book, the cover of which read, Fundamentals of Nursing. He was underlining passages with a pencil, his face furrowed in concentration. He wasn't just passing the time, he was actively trying to understand her world. Seeing that, the last wall of doubt in Lauren's heart crumbled. She approached. He looked shocked to see her, quickly closing the book. You didn't have to pay the debts, she said, her voice soft. He gave a small, sad smile. I know, but I had to. For me, not for you. To prove to myself that all that life could, in the end, do some good. Lauren looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the millionaire from the photos, nor the liar from her hallway, but the man in front of her, trying to learn about palliative care in a cheap restaurant. She took the envelope out of her purse and slid it across the table. Inside, the $20 bill. Now we're even, she said, her voice clear and without hesitation. The debt is paid. Whatever comes next, it's not an obligation, it's a choice. 6 months later, Luke and Lauren's life had found a new, quiet rhythm, a melody composed of the small gestures of an honest love. Luke continued to drive his Camry part-time, but his afternoons were dedicated to volunteering at the hospital where Lauren's grandmother had been treated. He found a purpose in comforting families, his old skill of commanding boardrooms now used to calm fears. Lauren was in her second year of nursing school, supported by a merit scholarship she had earned with long nights of studying and iron-willed determination. Her success was her own, and the pride in Luke's eyes was his greatest reward. The peak of that new life came on a Sunday afternoon, when Lauren's grandmother, Rose, with hands trembling from age, took Luke's hand. She took a simple silver ring from her own finger and slid it onto his. "Anyone can buy an expensive ring," the old woman said with a wise smile. "You earned this one." Luke looked at the ring, a circle of pure acceptance. He finally belonged to a family. But the past, like Madison, doesn't give up easily. Her revenge didn't come like a hurricane, but like a slow, calculated poison. Using her connections and her vast resources, she fabricated a narrative and leaked it anonymously to Lauren's college ethics board. The story was a masterpiece of cruelty. Lauren Mitchell, the model student, was actually a manipulative schemer who had seduced a mentally unstable millionaire, Luke, in his exile, to pay off her family's debts and fund her studies. Madison painted her as a smarter version of herself. The letter from the university arrived on a Monday, informing Lauren that her scholarship was suspended and a disciplinary hearing was scheduled. Her dream, built with so much effort, was about to be demolished by a lie. Luke knew the moment he saw her face. He didn't need to ask who was behind it. That same afternoon, he confronted Madison in a public cafe. She expected anger, shouting. Instead, she found a calm man, whose gaze held not hatred, but a kind of pity. "Why, Madison?" he asked. She smiled, feeling the power. "Because you humiliated me. And to teach you that, in the end, power always wins." She gave him an ultimatum. He would leave Lauren, give Madison a massive financial settlement, or she would use every resource to ensure Lauren's name was dragged through the mud, her nursing career over before it even began. The old Luke would have hired an army of lawyers, but the new Luke knew that fighting on her turf was a defeat. That night, he and Lauren made a decision. They wouldn't fight with power, but with the only weapon Madison didn't possess: the raw, naked truth. On the day of the hearing, they walked into the room alone. In front of a committee of serious faces, Luke Henderson told his story. He spoke of his loneliness, the cynical test, Madison's greed, and his own breakdown. He spoke of driving an old car, of feeling invisible. And then, he spoke of meeting a girl who shared her sandwich and taught him what dignity was. He presented the documents proving the donation of 90% of his fortune, a decision made months earlier. And at the end, when a board member asked what proof he had of such a simple life, he took out his wallet, and from it, a small ketchup packet, now protected in plastic. Their raw, vulnerable honesty disarmed the cynicism in the room. Madison's lie was undone by the simplicity of the truth. Lauren was exonerated. Sometime later, the sun sets, painting the sky orange. The old Camry is parked at a lookout with a view of the city. On the dashboard, in a small acrylic frame, is the ketchup packet. Lauren is behind the wheel. In the passenger seat, Luke is sleeping, his face serene and finally at peace. Rose's silver ring on his finger. Lauren watches him for a moment, a soft smile on her lips. He wanted to know if he was loved for who he was. In the end, he discovered something much better. He learned to be someone worthy of love. Life taught us that true wealth isn't what you have in the bank, but the character you build when your account is empty. Sometimes you have to lose everything you have to find everything that's truly worth.